In the introduction, I told you that there were really two stories of the alphabet. One linked with the Slavic roots, which go back somewhere between 600,000 BC and 11,000 BC. And another which deals with the Sanskrit roots, mainly in India, Nepal, and Tibet, and so on. That will be the topic of chapter 2. This morning, I want to talk about these Slavic roots. At a time when marks, signs, and symbols were all working together and only slowly becoming what we now think of as alphabetic letters. One of the earliest examples of this, where we have some kind of a date, is the so-called Zarkutansky ruins that were thought to be about 20,000 years old, but now in the latest datings of the last decade are said to go back to 68,000 years before Christ. By way of introduction, I show you 3 lines of symbols. So these are Slavic symbols. These are symbols of Vinca script in what is now Upper Serbia, right by the Bulgarian border. And these are Chinese symbols. Well, it does not take an expert to realize that there is some, this is from a Russian source, it shows you that there is some underlying pattern in symbol making that we have forgotten about. The same point was made yesterday when we looked at Kozarev, and he showed us that there were these families of primitive symbols. Now, this one, which we now call the swastika, is a letter of the Russian alphabet. It's a letter in about 10 early alphabets, but of course it has all kinds of symbolic meanings as well, and the implications for Vastu and for organizing space we will come back to in Appendix 12. These are the Zarkutansky runes, and I'm just going to draw attention to 2 of them. Notice again the swastika, and notice also this funny sign. Well, funny sign, it's not a funny sign, it's a fundamental sign. It is a sign that comes in all kinds of places. In the introduction, I told you that one of the strands of the early image making linked with the Tamgas. Well, here are the Tamgas of the Abkhazians. These are people around the Caspian Sea. Most of us, well, we have a vague notion where the Caspian Sea is, but in the 1st century BC, a man called Pliny went there, and he had to take 119 interpreters because there were at least 119 major languages that he had to deal with in his studies. And now, if you look at this symbol, it is again that same symbol that we just saw a moment ago. And if this is now from a page of my book, you will see it is called, in some cases, the Mari symbol or the Mary symbol. So even the notion of the Virgin Mary of the Christian Church, there is a place called Mary in Iran. It is much more than just some lady that was the Mother of Christ. It is a deep cultural symbol that goes back tens and tens of thousands of years. In fact, it also is the symbol of so-called the god Tengri, or Khan Tengri, who has a mountain called Khan Tengri in the Altai Mountains. And if you take one bit, so remember I said that the symbols start as 4-fold symbols, and then you take one bit off, and then you have a letter. So if I do that, I get this, and that becomes the Algiz rune. And we'll come back to that at a later stage. If I take this one and put a line through it, I have the yen symbol. And here you see a whole series of variations. So here we are in the North African alphabet, and if you look at the detail, again, that letter. And this is one letter in various versions. I call him the trumpet boy, or the candelabrum boy, because he looks like a candelabrum. And that returns there as the letter E, or Ha, sorry, in Arabic. And there you see it as symbols. And this is one, and these are early letters of Hebrew. So what begins as a symbol, as a general symbol, suddenly breaks down into pieces, and the pieces become individual letters. And then they become further abstracted, and then we think, oh yes, well, alphabet letters are just, you know, the abstractions. And once people were abstract, then we had alphabets. Not the case. Well, here you see that Algizrun now as a head, and this is a shaman, who is also a letter. But he is also the three worlds. So he's the earth, the atmosphere, and the heavens. And here you have a bigger picture of that shaman. They put drew these pictures on shamanic drums, and then they beat the drums. And here is yet another version of it. Here you use a basic kind of grid, a simple one, and that creates then combinations, create letters. Here you have the word man, here you have shir, and so on. And what did the shamans do? Well, the shaman sometimes just beat his drums, but often, and this happens all over the world, you create a stick or a pole. And the pole is sometimes 5 feet high, sometimes it's 20 meters high. And the shaman climbs the pole, and in climbing the pole, he actually climbs to heaven. And the whole point of the shaman's exercise is that he is communicating with another world. So here is a primitive drawing of the shaman going to the top of the pole. Here is a much more complicated drawing where you see the shaman, and each of those points is numbered. And so there are 20 or 25 or 30 points. And then when he goes there, he communicates with another world. And the shamans have a role. They can cure at a distance or kill at a distance. So the shaman can decide that somebody in village 50 kilometers away is bad and has to be dealt with. And so he concentrates, goes on a vision quest, and kills that person. Or somebody is ill and they need to be saved. He does the same thing without going there, and he saves them. But this is then in this whole realm of magic. And as I say, this whole, in Egypt, we saw that there were 80 magical languages and 80 magical alphabets. We're not going to deal with those for the most part, but it's terribly important to understand because it's the background for all the things that happen afterwards. Here is a Taoist version of such a vision, and there are beautiful drawings in great detail. So it's not just something that happens in Mongolia. There are shamans in Australia, in Japan, in South America, North America, in fact, all over the world. This is well, and part of this is that there is a world tree. Your world tree is normally the banyan, but in other parts of the world, it's the ash tree or the baobab tree, and that one tree becomes a symbol for the whole world. And here is a Scandinavian drawing of the world tree showing the whole world. Now what's interesting is the early history of letter making is connected with this. So the simplest letter is what we would call the letter I. Yes, the first one. I add 2 little bits and I get that. I add an X in the middle and I get that. Then I just take off the 2 extremities and I have this. And then I extend that a bit and I get that. Yes? And these are all letters, rune letters. And then I draw it this way. And so now I have 9 points. And those are the 9 worlds of the Scandinavians. And then I add 3 runes to each of those. And I have the universe. So again, the letter making is for speaking, but it's also for creating the cosmos. And so I have 9 worlds, 9 gods, and of course in your country you have the Navaratri, you have the 9 planets, you have the 9 days, connected also with Durga at Tashain, and then on the 10th day the system is closed and you start a new cycle. And in Christianity we have the novena of the Virgin Mary, 9 days again. So 9 is, when I was a boy I got pneumonia. On the 9th day the doctor said if he survives tonight he will live. And I fortunately managed to be here today. So now this idea of cosmology as a basis of letter making is something that is across all the cultures. So here are 3 lines. Well, it's called the yang symbol in Chinese. But it is also the 3 worlds, the earth, atmosphere, and heaven, or earth, man, and heaven. If I draw it like this and add a stick, it is the symbol for a king. If I draw a single line and draw 3 vertical lines like this, then it is a mountain. So it is the king that links the 3 worlds, and it is a mountain that links earth and heaven. And the yang sign can be drawn this way or that way. So we're here in China. But this is Sumeria. And this is the letter Ho in Sumerian cuneiform. But the same principle, 3 worlds. And here you have it in the ruins. And here you have it as the letter Samek in Hebrew. And here you have it in another alphabet. And now I come back to the old Russian roots. So remember I was saying that there is this spiral way of constructing letters. So there you see the spiral. But the old Russians also link it, and with that they create this letter that we would think of as E. And there is a variant on the E. And here the spiral is used in another way to produce what we would call an S, and here what we would call a Z. And the letters link up both with primal motions and with physical motions of the human being. So here you see the primal motions, energy motions, but you also see the human being standing up. And in fact, this is that one. Then we have this T as an energy T, or as a man standing almost like a Vitruvian man. And then this one, well, he's in a yogi position, a yoga position. Now I take 2 T's and I get this. Then I have a variant. And again, always we have the geometrical version, the human version, and then there are letters to show you what combinations get you to that complex letter. Yes? And then I turn the whole thing upside down, or this one upside down, and I have a boat. And so there is a very curious way in which letters are mudras, but are also energy combinations. And remember when I was showing you the magic alphabet of the moon and the sun? I showed you the letter F as one of the, and that is the rune called Fehu. It's energy. So F is not just the word for fun and other more dubious words, and Fanta and so on, but it is also the word for maximum energy in practically all cultures. And then it gets done in this way so that we have what looks like a 4F swastika. And here you see one with even more things. And then here you have one where it's that way. Here there are different lengths. Here you have one with 8. And then we had the Trishula, remember the 3, which of course is the letter E on its side, well, vertically. Now if I take 4 E's in a row, I get this symbol. And then I take 5 of those, so those become now the 5 fingers, or your 5 first letters of the alphabet. And I now do 5 times 4. And then in between those, I put either backward swastikas this way, or swastikas with 2 things this way. Or I do this. And the point is, we see now that symbol making and letter making are completely connected in this pre-alphabetic stage. And here you see bits, well, here we go back to that Armenian one where we saw the swastika again. And then here are examples of them as individual letters in Brahmi and in Hebrew and so on. So what begins as symbols and as symbols of the world become individual signs and then become individual letters. So basically, if I take just one bit of that, I have a letter. Well, here is another symbol for power. And it is also a symbol for the cosmos. And then you can take that and do the mirror version. And each of these, you can do the mirror version. So here, again, I do that. And that is the letter Ha in Arabic. And this is the, remember I said there is a letter version and then there is a symbol version. So this is the old symbol version in Arabic. And then if I take bits of that, so I take just 1/4 of that, I have the letter S in Russian, the letter S, oh sorry, here's the letter S in Hebrew, and here's the letter S in early Hebrew. So again, 4-sided symbol, 1-sided letter. And here you start to see more details of how this letter makes. So now you have 4 mudra positions leading to this position, which you can see as a man, well, the kind of thing that you have to do at the airport now when you try to go through customs. You know, you have to put up your hands as if you're and here you see a more complicated one. It's basically the downward version of that. Here you see, again, 4, which gives you, again, a variant on your Trishula. And here you see a sh sound, part of the Savarga in your language. But you see, here is a man fighting a serpent or a snake. So it has what looks like an abstract symbol is actually a combination of 3 different letters, but is reflecting on a whole story of a battle in heaven that takes place at the time of Dashain again. And of course the sh is also the sh of Shaitan, and in the Christian tradition of Satan or Satan, which in some variants is also one of the names of Shiva, because Shiva is the destroyer. But that's another story. Well, here is an old-fashioned swastika of the Russians. It's the four rivers of creation. That links up with the left and the right swastika. They are called Jung and Drung in the Zhangzong dynasty in ancient Tibet. And they then become letters of the alphabet and become Posilon and swastika as letters of the Russian alphabet. And so again, what begins as a symbol becomes a model of the cosmos, then goes through a whole series of cycles, and then becomes a letter of the alphabet, and then becomes a symbol that we see everywhere, and then people forget that it was a letter of the alphabet. Here we see the swastika symbol in an ancient Russian text as a symbol of the cosmos. So now there are the four directions and also four rivers. So these are the four rivers of paradise. That symbol gets split into two, so we have a backward and a forward one. The origins of this go back, it is said, to 16,009 BC. It's the Jung-Drung symbol of the Bon religion in the old Zhangzong dynasty, which had its headquarters about 40 miles from Mount Kailash. And that symbol becomes various symbols in Russia, but then also becomes a letter of one of the old Russian alphabets as Posilon. And then this version becomes the letter swastika. And then this letter breaks down and you see that it becomes an individual letter. And this one becomes what we now call the letter gamma or G in ancient Greek. Now, when we travel around the world at the moment, we see swastikas and we either associate them with terrible things that happened in the 30s, or we just think it's a symbol, and we forget that there is this enormous history behind them. Well, here again, you see that symbol in various versions, functioning both as a symbol and then ultimately as a letter. And that leads then to the two great early religions of the world, of which most people have no notion anymore, namely Inglism and Yudzism. And there is a good possibility that Judaism in the very, very far past relates to this Yudzism, but that's another story. The point that is of interest to us here is that you see that there is a letter-making method that uses a top line for the creation of, in the West, we basically take a bottom line approach and then write the letters on that bottom line. But in Sanskrit, you take the top line and you apply them. And in the Ariskeya Karuna, as we'll see in chapter 4, when I come back to some of these themes in terms of the letter-making side of this story, they also all go from the top. And so here you see how the symbol-making links with the letter-making as, again, one of the backgrounds to the story that we're telling. Now, those symbols also, if you take one of these alone, you have the letter S, yes? And you then combine it 4 times, or you turn it around, and you get these various combinations. And then you start to create incredible patterns. And in the West, these patterns then become part of symbol making. So 3, of course, this is well, linked with all your things of tree in your country, but not just the Trimurti and so on. But in the Celtic tradition, this becomes the Triskel. And in the German tradition, this becomes the Dreifuss, literally the 3 foot. And then you have 4, and that becomes the 4 Fuß. And then sometimes you literally draw 4 feet. Or you add to those feet little letters E or other letters, and you get that. So it's not just that you create a 4-fold symbol, but then you can start to manipulate it and create a whole series of symbols. And you can do that with 4 spirals now to create more complicated interlocking things, to create variants on the flower of life. Or if we go to the north of Europe, to Latvia and Estonia and so on, there is something called the fiery cross, or the Ugunskrusts. Well, it starts with the forward and backward swastika, and I will not do a full analysis of this, but you can see for yourself what happens when you do so. You get an extraordinary range of patterns, and then you can isolate bits of them, and these then become decorations for walls, for carpets, and so on. And here you start to see how those patterns, so here's your swastika, right and left, yes? Here are those other signs that we were showing, left and right. And then individual ones are individual letters. And here you see 2 bits, and here you see patterns coming from Afghanistan. So there is a whole history to be told that has not been studied of, well, we have books on ornaments. My teacher, Sir Ernst Gombrich, wrote a book, A Sense of Order, which was on the history of ornament. But nobody, and there are books on ornaments and patterns in tapestries in Afghanistan or in Iran and other places, but we have not anywhere a place that you see how there is a world of symbols and how all of this comes together, and the relation to letter making. And I will have one of the appendices, I call it knitting and weaving, because I will show you examples of how some of the basic letters come up in the most unlikely places, and even in baking. But that's another story, and a later story. Now, the Russians, in their primitive religion, well, it's now all officially not allowed because it's officially the Orthodox Church, but they have what they call a capiche. They have a portable version of their religion, and they go into the forest and put up stones in the way that, well, we have things like Stonehenge in the West, right, with stones. Well, they have a series of poles that they set up very quickly, and the poles represent all their gods. The most simple version is 3 gods, and there are 3 symbols, and you will see that this one is a variant of that symbol that we call the male symbol, yes, and that links with the AIDS symbol today. Now you turn it around and you get that symbol, and they put them into trees. And here you have the Y symbol, which, if you remember the Mari sign and the Tengri sign, it's basically taking out one of the things, and then you have a Y. And then here are variants that show you a series of primitive gods. Well, here I take you through some variants of that upward and the downward one. This is a Chinese one, this is a Nordic one, and these are, and they are also connected with the Tengri religion, but that's, again, beyond the scope of what we're doing. This is the letter Sh again, and this is another variant, and you notice that the letter version of it, or the figure version of it, resembles a bird. Well, here are various versions of that bird, and it becomes the symbol of the Ukraine. and various complicated versions. And here you see the what we call the Algiz rune linked with a sun pattern in 8 directions. And here basically a Japanese yen in a symbol. So symbols, letters, marks, signs, all interacting. Well, if we abstract this a little more, that bird is either an upward bird and is the letter A, or a downward bird and it's the letter B. Azbuk, and then Azbuka is the Russian, one of the early Russian names for an alphabet. Well, here I show you the same principle in an early Bulgarian alphabet, to which we'll come back at the beginning. So these are 2 A's, yes, and these are 3 X's. Remember these shapes because we'll come back to those. So now I take this shape, and I put that, and I put that, and that gives me Sa in Old Bulgarian, and that means Christ. Now this isn't to say that Christ is a bird, but to say that the fundamental ideas of these letters, there is a deep, remember I said that every letter has a meaning. And so here we have the letter as a bird, and the letter as a bird that both rises and descends. And so the resurrection, the death and resurrection, which we will celebrate in the Christian tradition this Sunday for Easter, has, at a symbolic level, a much deeper thing. And in Appendix 2, when I talk about the stories, I will show that this bird that resurrects as a phoenix, as a firebird, as a hauma bird, as many other kinds of birds, is deeply connected with the underlying themes of all the great cultures. But for the moment, this is called ornamental glagoli. So it's a form of Russian, but where you see not only the pattern, but also, or the letter, but also see the complicated variants, and then the pictorial connections. And here you see so the abstract letters, and then some of the runic variants connected with them. Well, now, just for fun, I take you and show you 4 birds in a pattern, in a decoration, so just for a tablecloth. And here, if you look closely, there you see the birds again, yes? And you see other, and that T symbol. So again, if I were to take your son, Ayam, and to show him this, he'd say, you know, nice decoration. And if I showed it to my niece or nephew, the same thing. But the point is, in Middle Asia, this is decoration, but it is also letters. And the two are completely connected still. Whereas in the West, we have made letters something that you put in your ABC, your alphabet book, or your little song, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and completely separate from this very deep connections of symbols and marks and so on. Well, to show you some of the complex origins of the Russian tradition, we have that X symbol, which we saw also in the world tree. Remember when we got to that point? Well, that becomes that. It is also, if I draw it out, becomes a isometric cube. But if I make it into a circle, I can get the 6 sides for the sun. I can get a flower of life, and I can get that variant. I can make a whole, put that flower of life into a bigger circle, and now it becomes a calendar of the year with 30 points. And point 19 becomes the summer solstice. Now 19 is important because if I take the Western gematria, So 1 to 10 is 10, but then 11 is 20, so on. 19 is 100. So this is the, and then 28 is 1,000, and 37 is 10,000. 10,000 is infinity for the, or the equivalent of infinity for the Chinese. There are 10,000 minus 1 rooms in the great city, forbidden city of Beijing. And 10,000 is also, well, 37 becomes the number of letters in one of the early syllabic alphabets of China. And 37 is the key number of creation in the Old Testament. So there are very curious and complicated connections that we have again forgotten. I'll come back to those in Appendix 3. Now, remember we saw that bird going upwards? Well, here he is in one alphabet, there he is in another alphabet, here he is in a sign. That bird becomes the double eagle that we associate with Russia, with Prussia, and with the city of Moscow. But where does it come from? Well, it comes from the double-headed eagle. Well, one is an eagle and another is a phoenix in this old Inglism religion that is said to start 600,000 BC and was then reinvented in 103,000 BC when Asgard got changed to Omsk in Middle Russia. And now, and there are all kinds of symbols here, and so you see various symbols that are both symbols and letters. And just for fun, I take your well-known letter of your alphabet. I turn it in 3 directions. I make it abstract, and I get that. I then show that that links up with IE, yes? Or I take this symbol, turn it this way, and it becomes a letter in the in various alphabets of the West. And now look closely, please, because here are again our another version of our tamgas. And notice here we have that same turning and twisting and systematic turning and twisting of, well, it's a Trishula symbol, and I simply turn it different ways and I have different letters. And if you look here, I showed you bits of this yesterday, but you will see those same symbols coming back here. And so there is a forgotten history of how symbols become letters and then show up in the most amazing places. So here we see swastikas, we see E's in 4 directions. You see swastikas going one way and then going the other way, and then H's, yes, and IE's, and then IE's backwards, and so on. So to west, and this is summer because there's a red on the fire of, and this is winter. So to a Russian, these are clothes of my Russian boys. So for a Russian, they don't just look and say, oh, I'm wearing my winter sweater. They are really carrying their alphabet on their arms. And here, well, this is the symbol that we connect with Pisces in this form. Well, that you split and becomes that, or it becomes this little man. That becomes one of the letters of Hebrew. That's the early version, and then it becomes that. That becomes the letter F in North Africa. Here you see Yad Ye Yat, 3 versions, and these are 2 versions of Yaz. And then here you see 2 variants again. So again, what seems as an abstract symbol gets combined, simplified, and becomes letters in different alphabets. So we see how these go, and then there is this crisscross version, which comes in 2 versions. Now, that represents letters in some contexts, but then gets combined and becomes a decoration on the roofs of houses, as you see here. And it becomes a pattern that you see in embroidery, and then becomes linked in various artistic symbolism. So again, this curious crossover between the symbol making, the letter making, and the mark making. And the letters get quite complicated. So there is the word A, but the letter A is also R-E. So A-R-E-E. And you can draw that as 4 letters, A-R-E-E, and it then becomes, so again you have that 4-sided thing, all linked up with this one concept of Eri. Or you take the T, the plus, and the X. Here you see that as in the numbers of the Turks. Here you see the number X, plus, meaning 10. Then we get the sound theta, ABGD, HWZ, HT, theta, Y. So it's letter 9. That becomes this symbol. But here you see that crosses and X crosses become a whole series of symbols in the Tengri tradition. And what happens is that not only do we take the symbol and split it into 4, we take the symbol and we do mirrors. So you take the P and you do the reverse. So the P also becomes an R. Or the Rido gets changed to this. Or this gets reversed to that. Or the E gets reversed as this. And sometimes you draw E in 3 versions. Backwards, frontwards, and then reversed again. Or the F 3 times reversed. Or you take the A and you take it through a series of versions. And here in yet another series of versions. Oh, sorry, go back 1 second. And here you have course. So now you have a name, K-H-O-R-S, but you write the K as a chi, so as an X, and then the O and R-S. And so a name becomes a symbol, becomes a word, and is also 4 different letters when you separate them. And here we start to see this in a more complicated way. So remember we said that A could be 10, but A can also be 1. And then here you see A again, but now in a bigger form, and it's Ma. So I combine them and I get Amma, which of course is the word mother in Nepali. But if you look here, this is the Earth Mama, or the Earth Mother, and you see the numbers 1, 10, 100, and 1,000. So this isn't just a mother. This is really the mother of all creation. I take the letter I and take it through various combinations. And now I take if you go to Russia, they'll tell you that there's such a thing as a Russian cross. Well, this is the cross. So you have your regular Christian cross, you add a little bit at the top, and then you add a thing going sideways. Now, the story that you're given is that this is a reflection of the 2 sinners who were on the other crosses. Remember, one was good and he went to heaven, and the other one was bad and went to hell. And so that this is supposed to be a representative of that. But you notice here, if you look closely, oo and so on, there are 2 sounds connected to it. And here it says crest. Crest is actually, well, crest means circle, but crest is also a letter in the old Slavic alphabet. And here you see that crest symbol is being carried by the angel up into heaven. Yes? And here you see that the crest symbol is also connected with this letter of the alphabet. And here you see a person as 3 letters. And so again, a strange interplay between letters, symbols, stories, and so on. There is the letter crest as a letter of Old Slavic. There you have a crest cross, and there's a more modern one. But now you go back to the alphabet and you realize that there is one that's going, one side is going up, and it's actually an energy man, and you see the energy spiral. Remember we said there was a spiral, but there's also a spiral that gets smaller and a spiral that expands. And so here, those two letters become two men and the energy level going back and forth. If you go to one of the churches near Smolensk, a monastery, you'll see two of those crosses, and one of them is, the cross is going this way, and the other, the cross is going that way. So, and here are two letters of runic, and what are they? They are again, one going up, one going down. And Nika, Nika is the word, Nike is the word for victory, and then you reverse it. So hidden in all of this is the notion of death and resurrection. And then combined as a symbol, and that then becomes a cross that people pray to as if it was normal. They get another explanation that's modern, but they forget all of this linking with letters and alphabets. And now I get back to the first page of the book and those first two symbols that I showed you. Remember, I showed you a man praying with a, well, we'll say with the AIDS symbol, and a woman with, now, there is that upward symbol. I connect it with this O symbol, or Ot symbol, and I create a little human being, who is the little yellow figure on the cover page. Well, the son of my friend Jonathan, in fact, is a designer, and he made that yellow for the cover page. Well, now I take that little man, and I put another upside down Ot on top, and then I vary that a bit, and each of those become individual letters. Or I take this symbol, and I do it upside down, and you notice there's a yoga person and a yoga person upside down. Or I take uk and chair, so there's the male and the female. And now you see that this letter, symbolically, the hand is holding the little boy before it's born, so it's at the spiritual level. Now I get the E, then I get the I, and then I get this, and here you see all the mudras involved with that. So here you see the process that I was telling you about of the symbols becoming letters, tearing away bits, and then combining them. But of course what we've done in the modern world is that we have an O. That's a single O, but an O with two dots below and two dots below and above. We've forgotten. Instead of three S's of the Savarga, we have only, well, in Hebrew we have two, sin and shin, and in English we only have S. So, and you'll see this throughout, that the Russians have many versions of a single letter, and then as we get to the further west, we simply drop out all the variants and we have just one version of each letter. So here you see that downward version, this is yo and you in Bulgarian. Here you see that in the Tengri religion and linking with the 7 planets. Here, quite fascinating, I take that bird symbol that we had, right, as a manifestation of the letter A, and I get 22 positions on it, and so it becomes a grid to create the whole of the alphabet. And then I draw it in a slightly different way in terms of a circle, and I get Nav, Prav, and Yav. And these are then the three worlds, and we get the three, and basically we get a circle of the year. I won't go into the details here, but these are some of the early symbols in Bulgarian. And now again, we're trying to understand how all of this happened. Well, one of the ways it happened is that there was a religion, there was a culture called Scytho-Sarmatian. So there were the Scythians and the Sarmatians. This is a list of the 132 Scythian ruins. I expect you to memorize all of these instantly, yes? But you will notice Arberdi is the first letter, yes? This is Old Bulgarian, which is supposed to come from Balkh in Afghanistan. And what is the first letter? It's exactly the same. Now, if you look closely, you'll see we have A, B, 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 G, G, D, 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 E, 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 and so on. I'm not stuttering, that's the way they are. And if we now go to letter 63, you see that this is that one, right? There you see the breath of God now going downwards as a Yah, yes? But more interesting and more important is that we have letters until 75, and then the rest are no letter. They're symbols. Well, there we have the euro sign backwards, yes? And here we have a five-sided star. And here we have a decorative thing that are actually, it starts with the way you do hay in the fields. And there you have the letter B and the letter 8, and there the euro sign even more clearly. So here a strange, and of course these, the red ones are the Russian letters today. So it starts in Afghanistan well, it starts somewhere in Middle Asia as Scytho-Sarmatian, goes to Balkh. When I get to the chapter, the appendix on the movements, I'll show you how the Bulgarians end up in Bulgaria and that part of the world. And then subsets of this become the Russian alphabet. But the real reason for showing you all this at this point was to show you that there is a dark history that we've forgotten. And here, I outline some of those letters that we've been talking about. There are those two alphabets that I just told you about. And here is the Chuvash alphabet, which basically drops the last 50 signs or something and starts with, well, changes one or two of them. So the first one's different, but the second, third, and so on are all the same. And so having got the whole thing, then you can drop bits and you have new regional alphabets. And now to go back to that old one of 11,000 BC, here you see some of those letters, and in each case you see the mudras involved. And then this is est, so that means is, and you can see how it's a combination. You have the energy version, this version, and then the word version, and then how that word version is made up. And then the end of the alphabet ends with things like what we would call semi-vowels or semi-consonants, so I, yai, I, you, and so on, and all of those in various versions. And just for fun, I end with two of those letters in that enormous alphabet that I showed you to give you a glimpse of the complexity of the history that we've forgotten. This is graph, and this is paragraph. Now those are two, graph is the word for writing in Greek, and we all know what a graph is and a paragraph, except this is the symbol that we still use today when we are doing a division, a section division. And this is a variant of it, but look at where it comes from. It's two, I think that's Ayam and Ilum playing with a yin-yang ball. And here a more complicated version. And so there is a forgotten history where we think of yin-yang as China, but I showed you that it's also linked with the alphabet of Ra in Egypt. There is here, according to the stories, we're in 11,000 BC, long before Greek was invented, and yet they have letters called crest, swastika, posolon, graph, and paragraph, and so there is a whole world that is forgotten. The point of this exercise was to show you this link between letter making and symbols. In the next lecture, I will go to the Sanskrit cosmos, as it were, and then in lecture 3, I'll do the breaths briefly. In lecture 4, I'll come back to movements and then show you some of the practical ways how we go from that very long Russian alphabet to the modern one that we have today. Thank you very much.